Hello, I'm Doug Hutchison. I'm co-author of Behind the Texas Badge, and this is my wife, also co-author, Carol Hutchison. And today we're going to do a little video and talk more about this book that we worked so hard on and to bring to everybody to see what Texas law enforcement really does and a true picture of it. I just want to start off by saying that Carol is a freelance writer and a photographer. Everything that you see inside the book is all her work. I mean, she worked so hard on this. We decided to start our own publishing company. We wanted to make sure that what is in this book was truly our vision and to show a really clear picture and an honest picture of what our Texas law enforcement is all about. To tell you a little bit about me, I'm a retired 39-year law enforcement officer. I worked for the Irving Police Department and retired with almost 30 years of municipal police service. And then I was a special ranger for the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. I worked for them for a little over 9 years before I completely retired in 2015. And I'm so proud of the career and so proud of what I did. And I made so many friends over the decades that I still talk to, quite often. Anyway, going back to Carol, she and I were talking about what we could do in retirement. And, I came up with this idea about this book that we would travel all over Texas and we would interview police officers, deputy sheriffs, game wardens, from tiny little Texas towns to big cities such as Dallas Police Department. And some of the departments we talked to had 2 and 3 officers. And one of them was actually a one-officer show. And so we really wanted to run the gamut and show, Texas at its very best, from the smallest to some of the largest departments in the state.
We traveled over 15,000 miles. We photographed officers all over Texas. We went to places like the Davis Mountains. We were at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. We were on rooftops of buildings looking down on courthouses. It was so much fun. We were in downtown Dallas on top of the Crowley Courts building, overlooking the skyline at night. It was so amazing.
Yeah, and trying to get those pictures of that assistant chief deputy from the sheriff's office in the dark when was really quite an undertaking, because we could kind of see his silhouette, but that was about it.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun and a chance of a lifetime to get to be in some of these places.
We were at the Texas Ranching Heritage Center in Lubbock, where they had taken some of the old buildings off of iconic ranches in the state and moved them in down there, put them back together, and we interviewed, I think it was Special Ranger Dean Bohannon with Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association.
His idea was that we would do a book of just photographs and do the photographs where they work and the areas where they work. So when we started planning this, I realized that we needed some text, and we can't just say that this is so-and-so and this is his rank and this is where he worked. That would be too boring. So I thought, well, I could just write an article about them and just do it kind of like a little magazine, human interest style, and just kind of tell a few things about them. Well, I came up with 15 questions that we sent to everyone, and it was like, what was your best day at work? What was your worst day at work? What is a case that you lose sleep over at night, and things like that. When we sent out the questions to the first few officers, and what we got back was so incredible. The stories were so great that there's no way that I could have told the stories the way they tell it.
No.
So I decided that we should just tell these stories in the officers' own words, and they were so much more powerful.
Some of those officers even talked about it was, almost therapeutic for them, because some of those stories that they told us, they hadn't told since the night that it happened.
Yeah, a lot of the officers felt like there was really no outlet to tell these stories, because a lot of them mentioned these aren't stories that you can just tell at the family barbecue, and so they just never told anyone. They didn't want to burden their family with it, but this book is a way of telling their stories. And so we were so happy to be that for them.
Well, and I was really impressed that they were so honest and open and so candid with the stories. And, you know, and I really want to point out that everything in this book is tastefully done, that anybody can pick the book up and read it.
So this is a coffee table book. It's got some beautiful big photos in it. We took pictures of squad cars,
badges, shoulder patches, because I know a lot of officers are really interested in those things. And I really want to point out that this book, our customer base is probably 50-50 men and women, and they both seem to enjoy it equally.
The way I decided to arrange the stories was, the first part is how they got into law enforcement. And those stories are always interesting. At first I thought that would just be so, you know, everyone's going to have the same story, but they do not at all. A lot of these stories are crazy, the way they got into law enforcement, and they're all for very noble reasons.
So many of the officers, you know, talking about how they got into law enforcement, said that they honestly felt like, you know, they were called to it. And I'm going to tell a story here in just a minute about one of the guys in the book. It's a really neat story, and how as a young child at about 12 years old, 13, something like that, how one little incident really propelled him into this job, and it's really a neat story. And I'll get onto that in just a minute.
Now, some of the stories are funny, and some of them are sad, and some of them are outrageous.
And that's just police work.
Right. And it really helped me understand my husband's career as a law enforcement officer a lot better, because, you know, I had heard some of the stories, but I didn't hear everything. We both thought we had heard it all.
Yeah. Well, I found out real quick that I hadn't heard nearly all the stories that are out there. I mean, there were some pretty incredible stories.
We decided also we wanted motor officers, canine officers, mounted patrol.
When deputy sheriffs that work livestock cases and round up loose cattle on the highway and what have you, and get out there horseback. We had a couple of those guys.
What we decided would be so much fun is to take the canine officers and have the handler answer some of the questions from the dog's perspective. And some of those are our favorite stories, and I'll read one of them to you. This is Igo. He's with the Irving Police Department, and he is a Belgian Malinois. And Igo says, "My proudest moment was when I finally got to bite a car thief. He stole a Corvette. I'm not sure what that is, but everybody was really insistent on me finding this guy. I looked through a few yards before I caught his scent. It was a mixture of sweat, adrenaline, and methamphetamine, so it wasn't too hard to pick up. I dragged my partner, that Ray guy that's always slowing me down and getting in my way, through a fence and bit the guy on the arm after he refused to do what Ray told him to do. The bad guy cried an awful lot about it, but I sure had a good time. It was really fun, and everybody kept saying, 'Good boy.' After we got the car thief arrested, I got some steak for my hard work. I love this job."
And Igo's handler, Ray Carmack, is also in the book. He was an officer at the time, and he's since promoted to sergeant and still with the Irving Police Department, doing very well. A very seasoned senior officer, sergeant. I want to tell you the story when we were talking about a minute ago, how, you know, the stories about how some of the officers got into this job, and one of them is one of my favorite people, and that's Michael Coleman. And he tells a really neat story of being about 12 or 13 years old, as I recall. And he grew up in Forest City, Arkansas, which is just across the Mississippi River from Memphis. And he said, you know, at the time, you know, when this was all going on, he said, you know, the relationship between law enforcement and the black community was, you know, kind of non-existent. And but he tells this story about being in an old department store with his mother. And she was trying to reach up on the top shelf and get something down, and she couldn't quite reach it. Michael looks up and he sees this guy coming down the aisle. He said, the biggest white man I've ever seen, wearing some kind of a uniform, and he had this Smokey the Bear hat tilted way down, you know. And he said he walked up and said, "Here, man, let me get that for you." And he pulled the item off of the shelf and he handed it to his mother. And as he walked away, Michael turned to his mom and he said, asked her, who was that guy? And she said, son, that was an Arkansas State Trooper. And Michael says that he decided at that moment that's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be a police officer, and he wanted to be that kind of a cop that was willing to help with any kind of the smallest details. Michael is just a super guy, and we're so proud to call him our friend.
And this story is from Brent Dixon. At the time of the book, he was a detective at the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, but now, since then, he is the sheriff of Cherokee County. And I wanted to read one of his stories. The craziest call I have been on would have to be the night another deputy and I responded to a call about a female screaming from a house. As we approached the residence, my partner knocked on the door while I covered him in front of the house. My partner knocked twice, verbally notifying the occupants inside that we were the sheriff's office. On the third time, my partner went to knock on the door swung open, and there stood a man with a pistol pointed directly at my partner. My partner took cover, and I began to yell for the subject to drop the gun. The subject turned his attention toward me, pointed his gun at me. The subject then noticed that I was a deputy and began to lower his handgun. We took the subject into custody and began to talk to him. The subject advised us that he lived alone and had shot a hog behind his house. He never has visitors, and when we came walking up with the flashlights, he thought we were there to rob him. He didn't have his hearing aids in, so he did not hear us advise that we were with the sheriff's office. That was a scary situation.
Yeah, a scary situation, and it had a very good ending, because it certainly could have gone much differently. I want to read a story to you from Texas Game Warden David Pellizzari, and David has really become a good friend of ours and his family. David goes on to say, I've really been blessed to be a part of several rescues on what I consider some of my best days. One in particular took place on Lake Palestine near Tyler. A Texas Department of Public Safety trooper called my partner to let him know that his dad and uncle had gone out fishing but had not returned that evening. A very strong cold front had blown in that afternoon, and the temperatures dropped below freezing. Several boats searched that night before calling off the search until the daylight hours. The next morning, we began searching the area by water and by air. My captain was in the helicopter and directed us to a body floating in the water. We recovered the body, who turned out to be the trooper's uncle. We were really losing hope that we would find the trooper's dad alive when my captain saw what he thought was the bow of the boat. As we approached the area, I saw a man clinging to a tree. The wind was blowing 30 miles per hour and the temperature was in the 30s. So I was dreading what we were going to find. Just before we reached the man, I saw his hand move like he was waving to us. My partner pulled alongside the tree, and I had to cut the man out of the tree. He was suffering from severe hypothermia but was alive. I took off my jacket and wrapped him up as we transported him across the lake. When we arrived at the boat ramp and got the gentleman in the ambulance, the trooper came to me and gave me the biggest hug ever. I had a chance to survive with the survivor at the hospital, and he explained the night to me and how he had tied himself to the tree just before he thought he was going to die. He had written "alive" at 2:30 on his hand to let us know if we found him deceased. It was a great team effort that day, and one I won't ever forget. That is quite a story, David, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
As I said, when the officers would send back their answers to my questions, I was always blown away. This is Evelyn McLean. She was a captain at the Georgetown Police Department. And when she sent me her answers, she made me laugh out loud and she made me cry. And really all of them did, but I wanted to read you the laugh out loud story from Evelyn. In the late 80s, I was working as the assistant mall manager for a mall in Round Rock. Part of my job was to hire off-duty police officers to work security at night and on weekends. I mainly hired Round Rock PD officers because that is where we were located. One officer kept asking me if I wanted to ride out, and I always said no. That just sounded so boring to me at the time. Well, one Wednesday night, none of my friends could go out. I wasn't in the mood to sit at home, so I called the Round Rock PD officer I knew and asked if I could ride out with him. We rode around for hours and there literally was not one call. I was so bored. It was almost 1 a.m. when I asked him to please take me back to my car because I had to work the next day. As we were driving back to my car, an off-duty police officer got on his handheld radio and asked if we would check by his house because someone was beating on his front door. The officer told me it was right on the way and asked if I minded. Of course not, I said. While en route, the off-duty officer got back on his handheld radio and yelled, "He's got a gun." The officer I was riding with flipped on his lights and sirens. For the first time that night, my heart started beating faster. When we pulled up to the off-duty officer's house, my side of the car was facing the struggle. I saw the off-duty police and the suspect rolling around in the front yard fighting for the gun. The officer I was with yelled, "Get on the floorboard." As I was trying to make myself small enough to get on the floorboard, he yelled, "Just take the car and get out of here." I quickly got in the driver's seat and took off. He had not turned off the lights and sirens, and I was driving the police car. At that moment, I thought to myself, I've got to do this job.
That's an awesome story. That's an awesome story, Eva, and I appreciate you sharing that one with us. We're going to talk just a little bit more about, and wrap this up. You've heard some of the stories from the book, and so you kind of know a little bit about what it's about. As I said, there were 103 officers featured in the book, actually 101 officers, and then there were 2 canine partners, and like you said, that Carol got the handlers to answer some of the questions from the dog's perspective, and some of them were pretty funny. One of them was an incredibly sad story that involved the shooting of the 5 officers in downtown Dallas. I think that was in 2016 when there was 5 officers that lost their lives, and that dog and his handler were very much in the middle of that, and just an incredible story.
Yeah, and there's so much history in this book. There are so many events that you heard about on the news that you'll hear from the officer's perspective. You'll hear their stories from what they saw. And I just want to point that out. There's just a lot of history in this book.
Yeah, some really major events that we know that you'll be familiar with. But, you know, we want to say that the book, like we said, is really popular, kind of 50-50 with men and women seem to enjoy it equally. Our customer base indicates that, and for those that have written us emails and messages and really talking about how much you've enjoyed the book, we really appreciate your kind words. Let me also say that you know, we've got books available to be shipped, and they're direct from us, so they're not on a cargo or container ship out in the ocean somewhere. If you're looking for a really neat Christmas gift, this is really neat, and it seems to be, you know, folks young and old that enjoy it equally. And like I say, it's a great conversation starter when you've got it sitting out on a coffee table or on display somewhere, and a great way to show that you support Texas law enforcement, or law enforcement period. We've shipped these books around the world. We've shipped one to Tasmania, I think to an assistant police chief in a city in France. We also shipped a copy to a retired police officer with the National Police in Norway. I think we've shipped some to Canada and all over the U.S. So it's not just, you know, Texas folks that enjoy these. They seem to enjoy them around the country. You know, and police work kind of seems to be, no matter where you are in the country, there's that bond between officers, and you know, they really appreciate the stories as well, regardless from where they're from or where they are.
And you can just go on to BehindTheTexasBadge.com and place the order. It goes directly to us, and then we will get it to you. We'll get it shipped out with our own hands. We package it and we mail it to you.
Yeah, and if they would like that book signed, how would they go about doing that?
Just send a message through the website, or once you place your order, you can reply to your confirmation, and it goes straight to me, and you just ask, and then I'll send you an acknowledgement that I got your message and that we will sign the book.
Yeah, and we'll sign the book and write a personal message in there to you, or if it's for someone else, you know, be sure and give us that person's name. Tell us if they are law enforcement or prior law enforcement retired officer, and we will put an appropriate message in there to them and be happy to sign those books and ship them to you.
If you have any questions at all, please let us know in the comments and we'll answer them.
Yeah, and we have a Facebook page. I think we have well over 10,000 followers on that Facebook page by the same name, Behind the Texas Badge. And again, our website is behindthetexasbadge.com if you'd like to order a book. The cost is $69. I think that pretty well wraps it up.
Yeah, it includes shipping, except if you want expedited shipping,
Yes.
that is extra.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much for being with us today. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. Thank you.